Hello, and welcome to the morality class on DVD. My name is Jim Kemna, and I'll be your instructor for the class. If you're taking this class for catechist certification, you need to make sure to contact the Religious Education Office and get the handbook with handouts and worksheets in it that you have to complete in order to receive the certification credit. Otherwise, you can just watch and enjoy the sessions along and enjoy them without. This first segment is going to be kind of an introduction to the topic of morality. And I'd like to begin with a question. I'd like you to think about some action that you performed or maybe didn't perform over the last 2-3 weeks that you would consider was a moral decision. And I'm thinking of something that happened to me that we might kind of use as an example. I'm driving up to Columbia, going to the mall, and when I get on the exit from the interstate, there's a man there with a sign saying that he's a veteran and he's out of work, and he's hungry, and that he's looking for handouts. Do I give him a handout or don't I? Is that a moral decision or isn't it? What makes that decision a moral decision and stopping at a stoplight not? Or is that a moral decision? You know, it's like, I think one of the things we have to do at the beginning of this course is to try to get a sense of what is morality? What's morality all about? I know we have the 10 Commandments, and a lot of people might think, well, it's just all about obeying the 10 Commandments. Is that really what it's all about? Or is there more to it? Is speeding, going over the speed limit, a moral decision? Is recycling or not recycling a moral decision? Is giving money to the church or not giving money to the church a moral decision? Or to a charity? What's morality really all about? Maybe you're thinking that morality is about obeying a certain set of rules or laws that might be given by God or just set up in society. Maybe it's following our conscience, whatever that is. Maybe it's doing what we think is right or what we feel is right or just trying not to hurt other people. Maybe it's living up to some kind of values system or standards. Maybe it's trying to get to heaven. Maybe it's just being a good person. Or it's trying to do what Jesus does. Live up to the golden rule. Or try to do what you can in order to affect the people that you know in a good way. Or building up a good, just, peaceful society. Is morality only for religious people? Some people assume that atheists have no morality. They can do whatever they want. Madeline Murray O'Hare and that bunch going and just doing their thing because there's no heaven or hell to be afraid of or to look forward to. Very difficult questions sometimes to try to figure out what this really is. And I'd like to pose maybe 3 ways of thinking about morality that are very common and see kind of maybe where you fit in these 3 ways of looking at morality. And actually, in some ways, all of them describe one approach or way of kind of looking at morality, and maybe all 3 together would help us understand or get a sense of what is this that we're talking about, morality. The first way of looking at morality that I want to talk about is what we might call problem-centered morality. This way of looking at morality, or a sense of morality in our lives, has to do with trying to determine what's right, what's wrong, in lots of different cases. It's about avoiding sin, following the law, following the Ten Commandments. It's about applying the Ten Commandments to life. So, thou shalt not steal. What does that mean? Does that mean that if I borrow something from somebody and don't return it and he forgets about it, I'm stealing? Or maybe if I really need something and someone else has an abundance and I take one, is that all these questions that might come in to trying to figure out what's really against the law and what isn't against the law. It's very act-oriented. It has to do with deciding whether an act or action that I perform is right or wrong, good or evil. And it's even trying to determine what is good, what is evil. We could look at some things that might look good in certain cases, but they're really not because of circumstances. And certain things that look evil in some cases, but they're not because of circumstances or intention. This would have to do, the problem-centered morality would have to do with case studies. And kind of some of the examples I was talking about earlier a little bit is where do we draw the line between right or wrong? Today in society, sometimes that line is really blurred. Sometimes for even really, I think, major offenses against the law or offenses against the Ten Commandments. Some people try to justify those things. That flows out of our history, in the church at least, with the sacrament of reconciliation. When priests were being educated as to how to counsel sinners, they were given a problem-centered approach to morality. What's the action? And is it sinful? Is it not sinful? And that was a lot of kind of the church's view of morality through a great deal of the history of the church. So that's one way of looking at morality. It has its weaknesses and strengths. It does tend to try to keep us on the straight and narrow and give us counsel, help us understand where our duties are or where we might be crossing the line into doing evil or being sinful. The second way of looking at morality is what you could call life-centered morality. It has not so much to do with individual actions and whether they're good or evil, but it's a much more holistic approach. It asks the question, who am I as a human being, and what's the purpose in life? It's two questions. And from there, it goes to, how should I be living in order to live up to who I am as a human being? And in order to try to act in a way that makes life meaningful, not only for me, but for everybody. And so it's much more complex. It would have to do with a lot more than just what's right or wrong in each individual situation, but how am I going to situate myself in life as in general? In some ways, it would be a much more positive focus to morality. Instead of avoiding sin, it has to do with who am I going to become? And who do I want to help other people become? If I'm going to develop and grow as a human being, what kind of attitudes and actions do I need to adopt? What kind of values do I need to work on? What kind of virtues do I need to develop? So my attitude of, self-discipline, even when I get up in the morning, when I go to bed, what kind of programs I watch on television, whether I see myself as going out of my way, I guess, to make a difference in the world and to make a difference in my own life. That has to do with more with the life-centered approach to morality. Here, in many ways, it's like everything is a moral issue. And, it's the kind of approach that could make us much less comfortable, maybe, in the way we act, because it's so all-encompassing. It's the focus is always on, am I doing now what's really going to help me become what I want to become? The thing about the life-centered approach, it could be looked upon as something from a faith perspective, something for believers, or possibly maybe not something for believers, possibly something that's just for every human being. What does a human being do in order to live up to what it means to be a human being? So the life-centered approach, I think, is something that in kind of a dialogue with the problem-centered approach opens it up some. And yet we don't want to leave the problem-centered approach out, because there are issues that are challenging that we have to really say, how am I going to apply this? What's my approach toward the life sciences? What's my approach toward war? In terms of human sexuality, what is really the moral approach? What's right and what's wrong there? So we need to be problem-centered and life-centered altogether, maybe. There is a third approach that I don't want to leave out here that I think is also really important. And I know these approaches really cross over between each other, but to make it more specific, also the faith-centered approach. Now, the problem-centered approach is also very likely a faith-centered approach. The life-centered approach could be also looked upon as, at least for some people, a faith-centered approach. But for folks who are faith-filled people wanting to really respond to God's love, to the relationship that God has with them, to commitment they have for faith, would probably look at most moral decisions in their lives as having a faith aspect. So this kind of is a layer that we might lay on some of these other approaches, but I think an important one. This has to do with our spirituality, who we are as a creature of God, who we are in relationship to God, how we act on the journey of life. It's not just about getting to heaven or avoiding going to hell. It's realizing that God is a real partner in my life. God walks with me. I have a relationship with God. And that relationship brings with it certain implications, like any relationship that we would have. I love God to the point where I want to do whatever needs to be done to have a relationship with God that is pleasing and to God and to myself, and so that I'm not a hypocrite. It's about being a disciple and walking that road of discipleship. It is especially about this word that Jesus kind of brings into the conversation, I guess you could say. It's the call to conversion. Jesus says, "Come and follow me." What does that mean? Following Jesus to the cross. What does that mean? As we experience conversion in our life, it's kind of a life-changing decision for us when we experience a conversion, leaving behind a self that maybe was not responsive to God's love and taking on a self that would be much more a disciple of Christ. And if you read the New Testament, there's a lot of really strong demands that Christ has for us as faith-filled people, as His disciples. So what does that mean for us to have a faith-centered morality? I think if we look at all three of these ways of looking at morality, we can come up with definitions for morality. First of all, morality is doing the right thing in every situation. Second, morality is living up to who I'm called to be as a human being. And thirdly, morality is following God's call to be a disciple. So as we move through the class, we're going to try to give some background on what this whole moral, I guess, the theme of morality is really going to be saying to us. We're going to do, the first few segments are going to be about digging back into some of the foundations of morality. We're going to talk about the Old Testament. We're going to talk about the New Testament. We're going to talk about the Catholic Church and its role in morality. We're going to talk about conscience and conscience formation. All of that trying to help us understand, I guess, the framework that we really need to operate in, not just as Christians and Catholics, but as human beings in terms of morality. Trying to give some clarity to an issue that today may not be as clear for a lot of people. Just what do we do? And then we're going to deal with 5 specific moral issues and try to clarify some of the values that are in conflict in each one of these issues, some of the things that our culture says to us, and what Scripture says to us, and finally, really clarify what the Church's teachings are in terms of morality. Now, we find in terms of our Church's teachings on morality that in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Part 3 of the Catechism is the Life in Christ section, and it does an overview of all of Catholic teaching and traditions in terms of Catholic morality. And so I would invite you to, we're not going to just walk through that section of the Catechism, but I invite you to kind of check that out as we go along and follow along with that, as well as if you are doing this for certification, read the handouts in the Catechist Manual, because I think they will offer you a lot of help as well. If you're doing it just for adult faith formation, we can, from the office, we can send you the Catechist Manual as well, and I think you would enjoy a lot of the readings in there that you could use to supplement the class. Now, I want to deal with a couple of other things before the end of this first segment. One of them is that, and I think this helps us understand some of the things that are at stake here in terms of morality and why a lot of different people might have different approaches to morality. Lawrence Kohlberg, a few years ago, did a study of people and their levels of moral reasoning. And what he tried to do was offer them some case studies and try to ask them what is right or wrong in this case and why. And particularly he was interested in why. And I think that we can see that it sheds a lot of light on why in society there are all kinds of people that see morality and different moral issues very differently in terms of whether they're right or wrong. And he came up with 6 stages of moral reasoning, from very immature levels of moral reasoning, or pre-conventional as he called them, to quite mature levels of moral reasoning, post-conventional. And I just want to describe those for you, not using terms he used, because he used terms that were kind of a little bit scientific, but these are terms that are more popularized, but I think they do describe what he was trying to say. And the first term in his stages of moral reasoning is called the spanking level. Now, in the spanking level of reasoning, and here people would see, and this is more of a childlike level in a way, but in this level of moral reasoning, people felt like a thing was either right or wrong depending on whether they would be punished or not. So this has to do with punishment. So when I slow down, when I see the state trooper on the road, I'm slowing down because I'm afraid of getting a ticket. So this has to do with fear of being punished, and why I would obey certain moral laws or moral codes is because I'm afraid of being punished. The second level, or the second stage, is, we call it, he didn't use this term, but I think it describes it, the lollipop level. And the lollipop level is very much in the same category as the spanking level, except here it has to do with getting a reward. Things are right or morally correct because I will be rewarded if I do it. So this is kind of the positive side of the spanking level, but still very immature. If I only see something as morally okay because I may get rewarded if I do it, then it's still a very low level of reasoning. The next level is the good boy, the good girl level. Here, it's more mature than the first two levels because this has to do with physical pain or suffering coming my way. The good boy, good girl level has to do with how I'm considered in the eyes of others. So I would consider something morally correct if it's going to be pleasing to other people, or if it's going to seem to me like they will think better of me if I do this, or don't do something that they may think is wrong. Again, one of the things about all three of these levels is the moral sense or the motivation for doing the right thing or avoiding the wrong thing comes from outside of me. It's not within me. And so all three of them are fairly immature. I think we could see them in children, but very possibly in some adults too. The fourth level of moral reasoning is more outside of me, and it has to do with duty or law. And here, the motivation to do the right thing comes from within, but the reasoning is that I must obey the law. I must do my duty. It's kind of a sense of society has certain rules and laws, or religion has certain rules and laws, and we need those rules and laws to kind of have an orderly society or to clarify expectations. And so my job as a citizen or as a believer is to obey these laws because that's what I'm called to do. If I'm a U.S. citizen, I have a duty to obey the law and duty to do what I'm called to do as a citizen. It's more internal, the motivation, but it has to do with law. It goes as far as the law goes. The next level of reasoning has to do with principles. Internal principles are convictions. In other words, I have a set of values wherever they came from, my parents, faith, society, whatever, that impel me to do the right thing. In other words, I believe in peace, and I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to live up to that. Or I believe in honesty, and I am going to be an honest person. Or I believe in the golden rule. I'm always going to do what I think I would like other people to do to me. So this is much more internal and much more mature. I live out my principles or convictions, maybe at the cost of losing a job or being persecuted. Last but not least, we have the sacrificial love level. And this is a level of morality that a lot of us don't reach. It's a level of morality that was demonstrated by Jesus on the cross, demonstrated by the martyrs, demonstrated by Mother Teresa, who was willing to just surrender her own well-being for the sake of others. It's living your life hoping to lift up other people. A lot of parents do this. And so I think we all do this from time to time, but the sacrificial love level as a norm for morality is something that we may not reach that much. As a final piece to this first segment, I'd like to just kind of give you a little story. And the story is about a Mrs. Bergmeyer. I don't think this is probably a true story, but just kind of imagine that it was true. At the end of World War II, Mrs. Bergmeyer is German, and she's captured by the Russians and taken into Russia, into the Gulag, and imprisoned there. None of her family in Germany knows where she is, what happened to her. Mrs. Bergmeyer knows that prisoners in the Gulag in Russia don't escape. The Russians, because of all the destruction that Germany did to Russia, probably aren't going to send her back. But she gets word that pregnant women are seen as a problem in the prison camp, and that people who are pregnant or sick with some kind of contagious disease are sent home to Germany. So what she does is, even though she doesn't want to, she decides she's going to let a Russian camp guard impregnate her so that she'll have that reason to go back home. And she does. She gets pregnant and she's sent back home. She tells her husband what she did, and her husband is just fine with it. She has a little child, and they raise that child as their own. They become a happy family back in Germany. Did she do the right thing? Adultery, of course, is wrong. Did she have, in that case, a good reason to do what she did or not? How would we decide that? As this class goes along, we're going to try to parse out some of these kind of situations. But one of the things I think we have to pay attention to is that there are two different kinds of morality. And one is objective morality, which is kind of law-centered or rule-centered. Whatever action breaks a certain rule is wrong. So in this case, Mrs. Bergmeyer, even though she did in a sense a loving thing, she committed adultery, so it's wrong. Would you say that? Would you agree with that? If you would, your reasoning is much more objective. We also have a subjective kind of morality that's very popular in our society today. And subjective morality would always kind of take the individual circumstance and look at the exception. Subjective morality tends to look at each individual and what they feel. If your intention is good, if it seems like you were trying to do the right thing, despite what the law might say, or if you weren't obviously hurting somebody, then it's all right. Subjective morality is kind of a gray area type of approach. And each individual's opinion or feelings is what's looked at. A lot of people would say, who are very subjective, well, I didn't feel like it was wrong, or it's not wrong for me. It might be wrong for you, but it's not wrong for me. So morality lies within the individual, as opposed to objective morality, where the moral, I guess, measure lies outside of the individual in kind of a general set of moral rules. So let's think about this. Actually, as a church, we tend to fall on the side of the objective morality, and I think there's a real battle going on in our society today between that subjective and objective. And some of the difficulties we have in our society are a result of maybe much too much emphasis on the subjective approach. How do we decide is the question. So I would invite you to take this journey with me as we continue to walk through this course on morality, and we will try to clarify, how do you decide?